Welcome back to the competition series. This is Omar Owidat.
And this is Mariam Sabit. Thank you for joining us today. We're really excited. We have a completely different episode today. There's not a lawyer. We're not interviewing any lawyer today, so that is great news. We actually have an economist in place. We have Mu'ath al-Masri. He's a principal from Charles River Associate, and we're really happy for this episode on economics. So I will let Mu'ath introduce himself.
Thank you very much, Omar and Mariam, for having me here. Very happy to be here. So as Mariam said, I'm a principal at Charles River Associates, and I'm an economist specializing in competition and antitrust. So Charles River Associates is a global consulting firm with many different practices. I'm in the antitrust and competition practice, and really what we do is we help lawyers like yourselves and businesses navigate slightly more complex antitrust investigations where you need an economic input or economic reports to help you make credible arguments based on sound economics in a very persuasive manner. And I think a big part of what we do, which is maybe more behind the scenes, is help you avoid making arguments that are not very credible in order to preserve your credibility in front of the government authority and really help you make the best case you can based on economic evidence and analysis. So hopefully that gives a good background, very briefly, about what we do.
You know, it's perfect. Thank you, Mu'ath. So I'll start in terms of saying competition and economics. So you're basically the other puzzle, or the side of the puzzle when we actually take transactions and go to the competition authority. We work in tandem, side by side. Can you tell us a little bit of what the role that economics plays in competition?
Of course. So I think competition law has economics at its heart. So if you look at, for example, why is bundling or predatory pricing an issue only if the firm has a dominant position? That really comes from the economic theory that says bundling is actually very good for consumers because it offers them discounts and lower prices. And it can only be a problem when the firm is dominant and uses bundling as a way to exclude competitors from the market. So that's just one example of how economics plays an integral role in forming competition law in the first place. Second of all, economics can help us screen out potentially benign and innocent conduct and mergers that should not attract much scrutiny. The authority should not expend much resources investigating because they are very unlikely to affect competition. So if we think about the UAE's competition, three pillars of competition law, for example, economic concentration, abuse of dominance, and restrictive agreements, in all of these you have to assess the relevant market and the market share, because if a merger leads to a very low combined market share, it's very unlikely to be a concern, and so you can avoid expending much resources investigating it. Similarly, with abuse of dominance position, if you don't find a dominant position in the first place, you don't have to spend much effort investigating this conduct. So economic analysis, for example, can help you assess the relevant market, calculate market shares in order to screen out any conduct that is likely to be not a big issue.
So your analysis is really neutral, right? I assume that you're applying science, so whatever you arrive at is a neutral report. However, the authorities' approach are different from one jurisdiction to another. So if you have one set of reports that you are giving to your client in support of their merger or acquisition, that may yield different results with different authorities. Is that correct? Or would you take twists or let's say give a focus on a certain economic or financial report towards each jurisdiction?
Of course. So we always, our kind of independence and credibility is our number one priority. So we would never make an argument that is not supported by the evidence, and that's across jurisdictions, because even if you do it one time, over time you lose credibility, and then any analysis you do loses its value. However, having said that, we do tailor our analysis to the context in question. So, for example, when we think about substitutability, whether two products are substitutes, could have a very different answer from one country to another, depending on social norms, the culture, just customer behavior in each country.
We have an example of that, Mariam, right?
Yes, so in terms of rice.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So, and for example, in terms of rice, if you want to come, and we had a transaction related to that, if we want to define what is the relevant market, whether that particular product of rice is in a certain market, and what are going to be the substitutable product, where it goes. Really, in the UAE, it's different. You have very sophisticated consumers in rice. You would not necessarily use the same approach in other countries where they could see that every rice is the same, for example.
So basmati or long grain rice is not a substitute to American rice, for example. So households will not buy the American rice as an alternative because it simply doesn't work as a dish to not to use basmati rice. And that may not apply in all countries, right?
Yeah, and just on that point to add, I mean, when you have consumers, it really depends on the consumer's behavior. So you mentioned social norms, right?
Yes.
So social norms is subjective, right? So how do you try to use that in the equation? Because you're really checking into how, as consumers like Omar and I, would we have different, maybe perhaps habits and different tastes? Would we be considered part of that? How do you put the social norm in part of the economic equation?
Yeah, that's a very good example because it's so subjective, as you said, and different from one person to another. So, if you have to try to put it in some kind of scientific way to show it as credible evidence to the authority. So I would say there are two main kind of pieces of evidence you can use in this case. So one is any pre-existing evidence, documents, or research that the company has already done to understand its market, understand its consumers in different countries. And then you can show that, this is totally unrelated to the transaction. We've done the survey 2 years ago and we showed that customers, for example, in UAE do not see long grain rice and basmati rice as substitutes. So that one is usually more convincing to the authority because it's evidence that is unrelated to the transaction that you already had that shows what you want to show. The second piece of evidence that you can use is if you don't have that pre-existing research, but you still very much believe in this argument and you want to get evidence for it, you could run your own survey. So authorities such as the Competition and Markets Authority in the UK, they very much like to do surveys in the context of mergers. They have a very good and extensive survey merger guidelines that tell you, what is the best practice and how to design a survey. And in this case, you can actually ask consumers if, let's say, your favorite brand or type of basmati rice was not available or was 10% more expensive, what would you switch to? And then you can kind of evidence and base it on really sound empirical analysis to conclude that, okay, this is the closest alternative, this is the second closest alternative. And if you've designed the survey in a good way, that can help you show very credible evidence to the authority, even in very subjective topics like this one.
In terms of market surveys, so aside from market surveys, which you've said are really helpful, what other tools that can be used in assessing a relevant market?
Yeah, so market surveys are just one tool of many that you can use. So if you want to see whether two products constrain each other in terms of the pricing, for example, you could run pricing analysis. So you could check whether, let's say, the entry of a new product, of let's say a new brand of long grain rice in our example, led to a competitive response in the price of basmati rice. And then that is kind of indirect evidence on consumer behavior because it tells you that if there was a competitive response in the prices of those two products, it meant that the companies have recognized that customers will switch between them. So they need, if one brand decreases its price, they need to decrease their own price in order to respond to that. So pricing analysis could be very useful. Other measures could be to compare with evidence from other countries. For example, if there has been evidence of customer shifts or substitution between two brands of price or two types of price in other countries that, of course, that would be, you'd have to take that with a grain of salt because the context could be different. But if you find, let's say, if you're doing a merger in UAE and you find evidence from Saudi Arabia, which has similar culture, similar norms, then you can argue that this is comparable to your situation.
So when you do financial analysis, and typically when we're approaching any transaction, the law requires us to submit audited financial reports.
Yeah.
And I guess you have a view on that also should be taken with a grain of salt.
Of course, yeah. So often the client and the lawyers send us these audited kind of legal financial reports and ask us to analyze it. But what we actually find useful are more the management reports, which, and the difference is maybe slightly nuanced. So with legal audited reports, they are based on the legal entity. So for example, if there's a global company and it has one office or a branch in UAE, it would have an audited report in UAE. But that doesn't necessarily tell you about all the sales and all the products being sold in UAE. It just tells you about what this legal entity registered in UAE is registering as revenue and cost. And it could involve a lot of kind of financial adjustments that mean something on paper and in legal terms, but not in economics and business terms. So what we find very useful are the management reports or management accounting. And this is what the business uses internally to assess its business performance and, most importantly, its performance against competition. So this is what, for example, a finance manager reporting to their CFO or to their board of directors would present to show the financial health of the business, how the sales are doing, are they increasing or decreasing for certain products, and that tells you, ultimately you want to understand the competitive forces acting on this firm, and really you want to understand not just in legalistic terms whether this legal entity registered more or less revenue. You want to understand the business as a whole. How is it doing in the UAE market, regardless of where it is registered, or regardless of these kind of financial adjustments that may not reflect the actual performance of the business.
And for this CMA, do they actually request for management reports, or it suffices just to have audited financial reports?
So they do look at the audited reports and let's say the UK generated turnover for legal and jurisdiction purposes to assess whether they have jurisdiction over this merger. But when my view is that this would be used by the lawyers on the case team, but then the economists on the case team would very much request the management reports, and specifically they'd be interested in revenues, in gross margins, in profitability of the firm. How has it been increasing or decreasing over time, which again can tell you a lot about the competitive forces acting on this.
And you're not going to find that audited financial reports.
Do you mean at the firm itself, or as an economist?
As an economist, if you look at it will not really give you an idea about the market strength or market share.
Yeah, as a very real example, for example, I find in an audited financial report, you might see revenue increasing from one year to another, just because the law has changed in terms of revenue recognition. So even if nothing changed in the market, you could find an adjustment, financial adjustment that happened, which to an economist would be very misleading because it might make you think
it's an accounting criteria change, not really a revenue.
Think that revenue increased and that they're doing better, but actually nothing actually changed in reality. And that's where the management reports would come in and show you that, the revenue have stayed the same.
Thank you very much, Muad. That's very insightful. That ends it for part one. Stay tuned, our dear listeners, with our part two session with Muad Al-Masri.